The planet Xylos hung in the dark red space like a bruised fruit. Once, it was a beautiful place in the galaxy with huge crystalline mountains, huge forests of bioluminescent trees, and skies that changed from purple to deep gold. But that was before the withering happened. Xylos was now just a shadow of itself. The trees had lost their glow and turned gray. The ground had become hard and cracked. The air itself seemed tired as it slowly moved through the ruins of what had once been a thriving civilization. The Xylosian people were tall and had skin that shone like mother of pearl. They walked through their cities with hollow eyes and defeated shoulders. They had tried everything they could think of. Every medicine, every prayer, and every ritual that their old culture knew of. Nothing had worked. And at the center of their despair was the reason they were still alive and now the source of their deepest pain. Kale was in the Grand Sanctuary, the last place on Xylos where life still thrived. Even though she was in pain, the dragon was beautiful. Her scales, which used to be bright emerald and gold, were now the color of tarnished copper. Her huge wings, which could have cast shadows over whole cities, hung down at her sides. Her breathing had become shallow and every breath was hard for her, which made her body shake. Everyone knew she was going to die. Kale was not just another dragon. She was the last of her kind. She was more than that. She was the center of Xylosian culture, history, and identity. The dragons had been protecting Xylos, healing the land and representing hope and strength for more than 3,000 years. The withering started 200 years ago and spread through the world like a disease. But Kale had done everything she could to fight it. She had used her old magic to slow down the decay and keep what little life was left. She had done everything she could to save her world. Now she was going away. Coordinator Vex, the Xylosian supreme leader, stood at the edge of the sanctuary with his fists clenched. His body seemed to flicker with hidden feelings, which showed how upset his people were. Dr. Kessa, the best healer in the Xylosian kingdom, stood next to him. Kessa's face showed deep sadness, which had been there for weeks. How long? Vex asked, his voice sounding like wind blowing through a cave. 2 cycles, Kessa said. Maybe 3 if we keep doing the things that keep them alive. But Coordinator, you know this isn't living. She is in pain. Every second is painful for her. Vex didn't say anything. He just looked at the dragon, watching her breathing get harder and harder and the way her eyes, still sharp and aware, followed him. Kale's intelligence was still very high. She knew what was going on. She knew she was going to die and that there was nothing in the galaxy that could help her. The last dragon had chosen the Grand Sanctuary as her final resting place as she faded away. It was holy ground where Xylosian leaders had gone for thousands of years to get advice from the dragons. The walls were covered in old symbols that told the story of dragon-Xylosian partnerships, shared victories, and a bond that went deeper than most species could understand. Now those symbols seemed to have a different rhythm, as if they were also sad. Kale's eyes met Vex, and the Coordinator felt something break inside his chest. There was no fear in her eyes, just deep sadness. She had saved their world more times than they could count. She had given it all. And now there was nothing else to give. The Xylosian people in the city outside the sanctuary had stopped doing their daily tasks with any real purpose. Stores stayed closed. Families stayed inside their homes. Like the withering itself, the news of Kale's impending death spread through the population, unstoppable, absolute, and changing everything in its path. Some of the younger Xylosians had never seen the dragon before. They had only known despair, a world that was slowly dying and a people that were slowly losing faith. Kale had been their last sign of hope. What would they have left when she was gone? Dr. Eris Thorne, a human, stood on the observation deck of a small research station that was orbiting Xylos and watched the data flow across her screen. The readings were all the same and all sad. The dragon was really dying. There was no standard treatment that would work. The Xylosian healing systems already used the most advanced medical technology from her own world, but it didn't help. Eris had come to Xylos as part of an interstellar research exchange. This program was meant to help humans and aliens understand each other and work together. She was very smart, very driven, and very caring. But she had something even more valuable: knowledge that most of the galaxy had forgotten. She was one of the last people who knew a lot about plants that grew on Earth a long time ago. It began as a hobby when she was a child, something her grandmother taught her. Her grandmother was obsessed with old Earth, when people lived in harmony with plants and saw them as more than just resources. In a time of synthetic biology and cutting-edge genetic engineering, this kind of information seemed old-fashioned and even pointless. But Eris's grandmother had insisted on keeping it alive, passing it down, and writing detailed notes on the healing properties of plants that had been forgotten and the healing wisdom that ancient cultures had developed over thousands of years. Most people thought it was a nice memory. Eris finally understood that it was brilliant. She had gone to some of the best schools in human space to learn about biochemistry, genetics, and molecular healing. But she had also spent thousands of hours reading her grandmother's journals, learning the names of plants that had been extinct for 100 years and figuring out the complicated chemistry of compounds that modern science had only recently gotten the tools to really understand. She had traveled to Xylos to talk about ways to study genetics. As soon as she got there and learned about the crisis, she asked to see everything. Every medical report, every biological analysis of the dragon, and all the other information the Xylosians had collected. And now, as she looked at the readings on her screen, an idea was starting to take shape in her mind. It wasn't possible. It was insane. It probably won't work. But as she looked at the information about Kale's unusual body, the chemical makeup of the dragon's blood and cells, Eris remembered what her grandmother had told her years ago. The old Earth knowledge wasn't about being primitive or backward. It was about realizing that nature had already fixed most of the problems we have. We only needed to know how to listen. Eris opened a holographic file on her personal database which she had kept up with since she was a girl by adding to it over the years. It was a complete list of all the plants on Earth, organized by how they could be used to treat diseases and compared to modern genetic analysis. She never thought she would really use it. But there might be something in here that could help. Her heart raced as she got up from her station. She had to ask for immediate access to the dragon. She had to suggest something to Coordinator Vex that would sound completely silly. She had to convince a whole world of aliens that an old piece of human wisdom, something that had been thought to be useless, forgotten, and almost mythical, might be the only thing that could save their most important life. Eris felt a real spark of hope for the first time in weeks. The meeting room in the central spire of Xylos was quiet except for the soft hum of the life support systems. At the head of a long table sat Coordinator Vex, with his advisory council on either side. Along with Minister Thal, the cultural representative, and a few other officials, Dr. Kessa was there. As they waited to hear why this person had asked for an emergency audience, their faces went from tired to openly angry. When Eris Thorne walked into the room, she could tell right away that she looked very different from them. Her small frame, her solid skin color, a warm brown that didn't shimmer or shift, her hair that fell in black waves down her back. Her body language screamed, outsider. She had been discriminated against before when she lived on Xylos, but most of the people there had been polite about it. There was always a hint of doubt though. People thought that, no matter how much they had accomplished, they were somehow incomplete and lacked the polish that more established alien species had. Today, she thought that skepticism would reach its highest point. Coordinator Vex, members of the council, Eris said, and she was glad that her voice sounded steady even though she was nervous. Thanks for meeting with me on such short notice. I understand that you are all going through a crisis that has never happened before, and the last thing you want to think about is me being here. But I think I might have a way to fix it. Minister Thal made a noise that meant, no. The person talks about solutions? We have used up all of the medical technology that our civilization knows about. What could you possibly offer that our own healers, who have been improving for hundreds of years, haven't already thought of? Eris had thought this would happen. She kept going. I'm not here to give you what you've already tried. I'm here to give you something you've all forgotten. Something that people haven't forgotten because they never had the chance to. I want to talk about the old ways of healing plants on Earth. There was a moment of complete silence. Then, a few members of the council started to talk at the same time, and their voices were clearly skeptical. Plant-based treatments? Customs? It seemed almost rude to suggest this to beings who had mastered genetic engineering and molecular reconstruction. Let me finish, Eris said, and the way she said it made them stop. It was polite but firm. It wasn't the tone of someone asking for permission, but of someone who knew she had something important to say. I have done a lot of research on how the dragon's body works. Her biology is one of a kind and doesn't fit into any of the known species databases. I think this is why regular treatments haven't worked. Your medicine can't fix the dragon system because it's not just sick. It's out of balance in a way that your medicine can't fix. Dr. Kessa leaned in. Explain. Eris said carefully, your medical approach is reductionist. You find the problem, the withering, and you go right after it with the strongest solutions you can find. But what if the problem isn't something you can fight? What if it's a sign of something worse? What if the dragon's body isn't working right, and that's why she's weak against the withering? You're saying her immune system needs to be fixed, Kessa said slowly. More than that. I'm saying that her biology, her cells, and her very being need to learn how to work together again. And I think I know something that might help with that. Knowledge from the distant past of Earth. Vex raised one hand and everyone else stopped talking right away. Dr. Thorne, you have our attention. But please know that we don't care about theories or what could happen. We want to see things happen. There are probably only 3 more cycles left for the dragon. You need to have a solid reason for suggesting something. Eris nodded and turned on the holographic screen that was in the middle of the table. She felt the weight of what she was going to say as she did it. If she was wrong, she would have given them false hope for their last days. She could change history if she was right, she started. There were plants on ancient Earth. A lot of them. Hundreds of thousands over the course of history. For tens of thousands of years, human cultures learned a lot about how these plants worked. Not just as food but also as medicine and tools for healing the deepest physical and biological imbalances. Plants from Earth started to show up in the holographic space. Some of them were still familiar, like plants that people grow in their gardens on other worlds. Some were extinct, and we only know about them from records and genetic samples kept in archives. There were seeds, roots, herbs, and roses. The ginger root was the same color as the sunset. It was a bright yellow color. There was ginseng, which was old, twisted, and beautiful. Plants that don't have modern names are only known from the journals of healers from hundreds of years ago. Eris went on to say, these plants worked through complicated chemical interactions. They didn't just treat the symptoms. They worked with the body's natural systems to help them remember how to heal themselves. Ancient healers knew something that we often forget today, that sometimes the best medicine is the one that helps the body heal itself. And you think this is true for the dragon too? Minister Thal asked, his tone doubtful but not as angry as it had been before. Eris said carefully, I think the dragon's body is different enough that it might respond to treatments that regular Xylosian medicine hasn't thought of yet. I would need to do a lot of research, but if my first readings are correct, I can come up with a treatment plan that uses both modern genetic therapy and knowledge of plants on Earth. The plants themselves won't be the cure. Instead, I'll take out their active compounds and combine them with targeted genetic intervention to help the dragon's own healing system start working again. For a long time Vex was quiet. You are suggesting something that has never been done before. Yes, Eris said. But the dragon is dying no matter what you've done. What do you have to lose? It was an easy question, but it seemed to hit a nerve with the coordinator. What indeed? They had already tried everything that was normal. No matter what, the dragon would die in 3 cycles. If this person's crazy idea didn't work, they wouldn't be worse off. And if it worked, Vex said, you would need to get to the dragon. The dragon, all of our hospitals, and her medical records. I would, Eris said. Doctor. Kessa said all of a sudden, and you would need to tell Kale this directly. There was something in her voice, like hope fighting against years of disappointment. The dragon must agree. Do you get that? Eris said, I wouldn't expect anything else. She had read enough about the Xylosians to know that the dragons were not things to be used. They were partners and rulers in their own right. They would have to know about and agree to any healing that took place. Vex and his advisors looked at each other. A few of them shook their heads a little. Some people just looked tired and ready to try anything. Finally, the coordinator looked back at Eris. He said, you might be able to get in. You can look at the dragon and tell her what you want to do. But Dr. Thorne, if you give us false hope and waste the dragon's last days on treatments that won't work, there will be consequences. The Xylosians are sad. They are in a lot of trouble. You need to be completely sure before you go ahead. I get it, Eris said. And she did. It felt like gravity was pulling down on her shoulders. But there was something else beneath the fear and the knowledge of how easily this could go wrong. A faint, determined spark of possibility. Eris stood in the grand sanctuary for the first time an hour later. The area was huge, going up into shadows that the soft bioluminescent lighting couldn't quite reach. There were thousands of years of history carved into the walls in stone and crystal. There were pictures of dragons in all their glory, with their wings spread wide and their scales shining with power. There were scenes of the dragons working with the Xylosian people to heal the land, teach wisdom and fight old enemies. And Kale was in the middle of it all. Eris's breath got stuck in her throat. The pictures and information hadn't prepared her for the fact that the dragon was really there. Kale was still great even though he was dying and sick. Her body was as big as a small building, and even though her scales were dull, they still caught the light and sent it back in broken rainbows. Eris could see the strong muscles under her folded wings. They were the structure of a creature made to touch the sky. But Kale's eyes were what really caught Eris's attention. They were open and followed her as she got closer. They were huge, smart, and so sad that Eris could feel tears starting to form without her knowing it. The dragon knew. She was there. She was a person in every way that mattered, not a patient, not an animal, but a being with thoughts, feelings, and dignity. Dr. Kessa was there, standing next to the dragon's huge head. The healer said softly, "She won't talk to you directly. Dragon speech is a type of psychic communication that humans can't fully understand. But she knows how to speak your language. She will pay attention. You can talk to her like you would talk to anyone else." Eris came up slowly and with respect. She was nervous in a way that she hadn't been in the council chamber. This wasn't about changing the minds of politicians or skeptics. This was about getting a dying animal to trust her. She stopped a few meters from the dragon's head and knelt down, making herself look smaller and less scary. "Hi, Kale," she said in a soft voice. "Eris Thorn is my name. I'm a person from a world very far away. Dr. Kessa told me to come see you because I might have an idea. It's likely a crazy thought. It might not work at all. But I wanted to give it a shot if you would let me." The dragon's eyes turned to look directly at Eris. Nothing happened for a while. Then Eris felt something. It wasn't a sound or a thought, but a feeling that grew in her mind. It was hot and tired and full of a kind of acceptance that was almost too much to bear. The dragon was ready. Not hopeful, Kale seemed to be out of hope, but willing to give this person a chance. Eris nodded but couldn't say anything for a moment. Then, "Thanks. I won't take up any of your time. I swear to you that." For the next few hours, Eris worked with Dr. Kessa and the other Xylosian healers to do every scan, analysis, and measurement she could think of. They took samples of the dragon's blood, scales, breath, and DNA. Eris sat in front of her with detailed scans of Kale's biology, looking at the structure of a body that was unlike anything she had ever seen. The cells in the dragon were strange in ways that made it seem like they came from a very old lineage. It's possible that Kale's kind came from a different world and a different time in the evolution of the galaxy. Her genome was stable but very complicated, and there were signs that she had once been even more powerful and connected to the world around her. The withering had attacked those connections, breaking the links between her biology and the environment that had once kept her alive. It was a disease of being cut off. And Eris thought she knew what could help. That night, Eris went back to her room at the research station and used all of her resources. She opened up her personal files, which were the journals and databases she had kept since she was a child. They were full of her grandmother's notes and her own research. She started up her genetic mapping tools, synthesis programs, and analysis software. And she started the hardest job she had ever had. She was going to have to mix chemicals from plants that no longer grow on Earth. She would have to compare them to Xylosian genetic technology. She would have to make something that had never been made before. A link between the dragon's unique biology and the ancient wisdom of Earth. It should have been impossible. But as Eris worked all night, only stopping for coffee and water, she started to see what it would look like. She could picture how adding genetic markers to an extract from ginseng root, which was known on ancient Earth for its ability to restore vital energy, could help the dragon's cells remember how to fit in with the world around her. She could see how turmeric compounds, which are known for their ability to reduce inflammation, could be changed to specifically target the withering's damage. She could see it. When the sun rose over Xylos, painting the sky in shades of violet and fading gold, Eris had a plan. It was hard, dangerous, and completely new. She also thought it was their only real chance, and she was sure of it in a way that went beyond logical thought. Now she had to get everyone else to believe her. 3 days went by in a blur of work. Eris set up shop in a lab next to the Grand Sanctuary, which had been quickly set up for her use. The Xylosian government had given her everything she needed, but she could tell they didn't believe her, even though they were officially working with her. Yes, they were helping, but their body language said they weren't sure. A person using old plant knowledge to save their most sacred being? It sounded more like a myth than medicine. Eris didn't care what they thought. She was too focused, too driven, and too aware of the clock ticking down Kale's time. The botanical compounds were her top priority. She had asked for genetic samples from Earth's preserved archives. These included seeds and cells from dozens of endangered and extinct plant species, all kept safe in vaults by the Intergalactic Botanical Collective. It should have taken weeks to process the requests. Eris sent formal requests to Dr. Marcus Chin, the director of the IGBC, explaining the emergency and how unusual the request was. She was surprised and relieved to get the go-ahead within hours. It turned out that Dr. Chin was also a student of ancient Earth botany. In his answer, he not only agreed but also gave him more resources like compound databases, genetic extraction protocols, and a personal note. Dr. Thorne, what you are trying to do is exactly what the Botanical Collective was founded to protect. Your grandmother's generation fought to keep this knowledge alive, and it may finally find its true purpose. I'm giving you everything I have. Make good use of it. The The samples came by courier drone the next morning. Eris opened the sealed boxes with shaky hands. Inside were physical artifacts from Earth's botanical past. There were seeds of a plant called rhodiola, which was known in ancient times as an adaptogen that helped the body and mind deal with stress. There were root cuttings of Chinese ginseng that had been kept in genetic stasis. There was a piece of turmeric root that was so bright golden yellow that it looked almost fake. There were chemicals from a plant called astragalus that were used in ancient Asian medicine to boost vital essence. The names themselves seemed to have a lot of meaning. They were like small, precious samples of all the knowledge that has been gained over thousands of years of healing people. Eris got her synthesis tools ready and started working. The lab was her whole world. She used Xylosian biotech tools that had been changed to work with plants from Earth to get the active compounds. She found the most important alkaloids and polysaccharides, the beta-glucans that boost the immune system, and the curcuminoids that fight inflammation. She put each compound to the test by putting it in contact with samples of the dragon's blood cells and watching how they reacted. The results were good, but they didn't prove anything. Yes, the compounds worked on cells, but not as well as she needed them to. The dragon's body was just too different from Earth's biology for the ancient knowledge to be used directly. Eris went deeper then. She started the most difficult job of all, changing genes. She took the plant-based chemicals and made them better by using Xylosian genetic technology to make them speak the dragon's cellular language. She couldn't just use what she knew about plants and humans, she had to change it and make it fit Kale's unique body. It was like building a bridge between two languages that made no sense, word by word, syllable by syllable, until communication was finally possible. By the end of the second day, Eris had made her first successful synthesis. A compound that combined ginseng's immune-boosting properties with genetic markers that were made just for the dragon to use to heal itself. She tried it on a sample of Kale's cells and saw that the dragon's damaged cells started to stabilize, but very slowly. She cried. Dr. Kessa found her sitting in front of the analysis screen, crying so much that she couldn't even wipe her eyes. "You have found something," said the healer from Xylos. There was no question. Eris nodded. "I think so. But it's only one compound. I need at least 5 more, and they all need to work together to fix different parts of the damage. I also need to know how they will work together once they are inside Kale's body. Because the dragon is so big, the compounds will have to spread out through a body that is as big as a building. Everything has to be exactly right." Kessa said, "Then you will figure it out." There was no doubt in her voice, only certainty. The Xylosian healer had somehow come to fully believe in Eris's vision in the short time they had been working together. "You will find what you need." Eris worked all night and into the next day, barely sleeping. She stayed awake with stimulant supplements and the knowledge that she was running out of time. She made one compound after another. Each one was based on knowledge of plants on Earth, but it was improved and translated through genetic modification so that it could speak directly to the dragon's biology. The immune booster that comes from ginseng and astragalus. Turmeric and ginger are both good for reducing inflammation. The cellular regenerator comes from extracts of old earth plants like angelica and dong quai. The essence restorer, which combines energy-giving substances from many different places. The integration facilitator was made to help the dragon cells reconnect with the natural energy systems that the withering had broken. Eris had made 5 of the 6 compounds she thought she would need by the end of the second day. She was deep into the work on the last one, which was the hardest and meant to help all the others work together to heal. Then Dr. Kessa came to the door of the lab with urgent news. "You have to come," the healer said. "The dragon's health is getting worse very quickly. We might not have 3 cycles. We might not have 1. Eris felt like her stomach dropped. This was the moment she had been both looking forward to and dreading. She wasn't ready yet, and the dragon was running out of time. The protocol wasn't finished. She didn't have enough information about long-term interactions. She hadn't tried the whole treatment in a controlled setting yet. She made a choice in that moment that changed everything. Sometimes when someone is dying, you don't have the time to be completely ready. "Let me finish this compound," Eris said, her fingers moving quickly over the synthesis controls. "Give me 2 hours." She worked with a level of precision that came from being desperate. The last compound came together, the coordination catalyst, which would make all the other compounds work well with the dragon's own special healing systems. Eris did one last test when it was all done. She mixed all 6 compounds together in the right amounts and then added them to a big sample of the dragon's cells. What happened next was almost like a miracle. The cells, which had been weak and disconnected, started to glow. Not literally, the analysis software used the word luminescence as a metaphor, but the biological activity shot up a lot. The cells started talking to each other, working together and coordinating their actions. The withering's damage, which looked like dark, corrupted areas in the cells, started to slow its spread. Not heal yet, but stabilize. The cells were remembering how to fight back. Eris saved the information, put all 6 compounds in exact doses, and ran to the Grand Sanctuary. The dragon looked worse than it did 2 days ago. She was having trouble breathing and her eyes were half closed. The soft shine that even a dying dragon had seemed to be fading. The bioluminescent lights in the sanctuary flickered in time with her heartbeat, as if the room itself was connected to her life force. Vex was there, along with all the other council members. Minister Thal looked serious. It was clear that he had come to say goodbye to the dragon. The meeting felt like a funeral. Eris walked in and went straight to Kale's side without saying hello. "I'm ready," she told Dr. Kessa. "The compounds are ready. The protocol is made. But I have to be honest with you all, I can't promise that this will work. There are too many things that could happen and too many things that we don't know. But I know it won't hurt her and I think there's a good chance it will help." "How likely is it that we will succeed?" Vex asked. He didn't sound hopeful. He just needed numbers, data, and real information. Eris looked him in the eye. "I don't know," she said with honesty. "Half of it? 70%? I can't be sure how to figure it out because this has never been done before. But I do know this. If no one steps in, the dragon will die in the next cycle. She has a chance with the protocol." The sanctuary was quiet. Vex then nodded to Kessa. "Go ahead." What came next was a careful and thorough process. Eris gave the drugs by both injection and inhalation, working with Kessa and the other healers to make sure the doses were correct. The immune activator was the first compound to enter the dragon's bloodstream through a vein that was as big as Eris's arm. Nothing happened for a few minutes. Eris held her breath as she looked at the monitors, Kale's vital signs, and waited for a response. After that, the dragon's eyes opened. Completely. For sure. Her breathing got deeper and easier. There was a sound coming from her, not a roar but something softer, like a purr that had been turned up 1,000 times. Eris could feel it shake the whole sanctuary. Doctor Kessa whispered, "It's working. I can see the difference in her cellular readings. Go on." Eris gave the dragon the rest of the compounds over the next hour, carefully timing each dose and watching how the dragon reacted. Kale seemed to become more real and alive with each compound. Her eyes got brighter. Her scales, which were still dull, looked like they were catching the light a little more brightly. By the time Eris gave the last compound, the coordination catalyst, which would make all the others work together perfectly, the sanctuary was full of xylosians. Somehow the word got out. Word got out that something was going on with the dragon. Word that things were changing. The last compound got into Kale's blood, and for a second, everything stopped. The dragon's body stiffened all over. For a scary second, Eris thought she had made a terrible mistake and that the protocol was failing. Kessa put her hand on her shoulder, which could have been comforting or a sign that she was getting ready for bad news. Then Kale's eyes lit up with a golden light. Not dim or weak, but bright, impossible gold. The light spread through her scales like the sun coming up in the morning. One by one, the dull, tarnished copper surfaces started to shine and shimmer, and they got their original emerald and gold colors back. Her body straightened out and uncurled. Her breathing got deeper and stronger. The dragon opened her mouth and made a sound that seemed to hold all of creation. It wasn't a roar, but a song, a celebration, a declaration of existence and power and return. The bioluminescent lights in the sanctuary lit up, as if the room itself was celebrating. People in Xylos came out of their homes to see what the noise was, and they saw something that couldn't be. Kale was still alive. More than alive. Kale got better. The dragon stood up. Her wings spread out, huge and perfect, casting shadows across the sanctuary that looked like they were touching the sky. She looked down at Eris with a look that showed intelligence, awareness, and gratitude so deep that the girl felt like she might fall over from the weight of it. Eris felt the dragon's thoughts touch her mind again. This time the message was clear, even though our brains aren't very good at getting through. Thanks. You brought me back to myself. Eris fell to her knees, feeling too much. Everyone in the council, all the healers and all the Xylosians who had come together started to make a sound. It wasn't a cheer, it was something deeper, more basic, a sound of happiness, hope, and faith being restored. Coordinator Vex stood still, his face wet with tears as he looked at the dragon. Kale's recovery news spread through Xylos like sunlight breaking through clouds. Within hours, the Grand Sanctuary was the center of a celebration that the Xylosian people hadn't had in 200 years. Thousands of people gathered in the plazas around the sacred space to look up at the sanctuary's open ceiling. There, Kale had started to move around, stretching her beautiful wings and reconnecting with the pure joy of being alive. But more than that, something amazing started to happen as the dragon moved through the sanctuary. The plants that had died in the holy space started to come back to life. The old gardens that surrounded the sanctuary's inner chamber, which had been dead and gray for decades, suddenly came to life with color. The leaves that had been brown and brittle turned bright green. Flowers that hadn't bloomed in a generation opened their petals to the sun. The trees that used to glow stopped glowing hundreds of years ago. Now they are glowing again with a soft, beautiful light. Kale was making the land better. The dragon's physical recovery seemed to be closely linked to the recovery of Xylos as a whole. As the dragon's own life force grew stronger, it spread through the world, reversing the withering in her immediate area. Kale had been the anchor point that kept things from falling apart, and now that she was really alive again, her healing energy could flow freely. Dr. Kessa found Eris in the lab, where the human scientist was putting together all of her data and writing down every step of the protocol for the record. The healer from Xylosian looked different. The years of sadness and grief seemed to have gone away, and she looked decades younger. Kessa said, "You should come. You should look at what's going on." Eris went with her to the Grand Sanctuary's observation deck. You could see all of Xylos from this point of view. What she saw made her gasp. The healing was getting stronger. Life was coming back to the city where the sanctuary's new gardens connected to the rest of the city. Things that were growing were suddenly filling streets that had been empty. The gray sky was starting to change, getting lighter and less heavy. And all over the place, Xylosians were coming out of their homes, running into the streets and looking up with tears in their eyes as they saw, for the first time in their lives, a world that was really, really alive. Kessa said with a voice full of wonder, "The dragon is connected to the planetary ecosystem in ways we had forgotten. Or maybe we never really got it. The dragons of old were the protectors of all life on Earth. They kept the worlds in balance." Kale tried to stop the withering by himself when it came. But she couldn't, not while she was dying. "And now that she is better, now the world heals with her," Eris said at the end. "Yes. You didn't just save the dragon, Dr. Thorne. You saved Xylos." That night, Coordinator Vex asked to see Eris in person. The scientist thought there would be something formal like a ceremony of thanks. She was taken through the city to a building she had never seen before. It was an archive, old and beautiful, with carvings on its walls that told the story of Xylos from its earliest days. Vex led her to a room deep inside the archive and said, "This is the Hall of Transformations. We write down the things that have changed the course of our civilization in this place. There are 17 entries. The first dragons show up. The joining of our people with dragons. The things that changed our culture for 3,000 years. He pointed to Eris. You will be the 18th. You will be inscribed today. For all time, for all future generations of Xylosians to know. A human came to our world with the lost knowledge of an ancient Earth and gave us back our future." Eris had never been to a ceremony like the one that followed. Artisans with a lot of experience came forward and carved a mural into the archive's wall using tools and methods that hadn't been used in hundreds of years. It showed Eris kneeling in front of the dragon, with the compound she had made floating between them like stars. It showed the moment the dragon got better, with light coming from her body. At the bottom, there was a simple inscription that said, "The gene therapist who remembered." Something inside Eris changed as she watched the carving being made. She had come to Xylos as a researcher, someone who knew a lot about a certain subject. She never thought that what she did here would really matter. She thought of herself as a small part of an exchange program, helping out and making a small difference. She didn't realize that she was part of something much bigger. Eris went back to the Grand Sanctuary that night because he couldn't sleep. Kale was there, resting but awake. Her golden eyes reflected the garden's restored bioluminescence. "Hello again," Eris said softly as he walked up to the huge creature without fear, only respect. Kale's head dropped, and once more, Eris felt the dragon's mind reach out to her in a gentle way. This time the contact meant more than just thanks. It was a kind of recognition. Kale wasn't seeing Eris as a healer or a savior, but as a fellow human being who had understood something important. Kale's thoughts seemed to say that you held our wisdom inside you. The knowledge of your old world. The knowledge of healing. You brought it here to our world and made it bloom again. "I learned it from my grandmother," Eris said out loud. She thought that knowing about the past could help the future. I didn't really get what she meant until now. Kale's presence seemed to say that this is the way of true wisdom. It waits quietly and patiently until the time comes when it is needed. And then, when the time is right, it opens up like flowers after rain. Eris reached out and touched the dragon's huge neck with her hand. The scales were warm and vibrated with power, like the heartbeat of the world itself. "Thanks for letting me try," Eris said softly. "For giving me something so valuable." Eris understood the most important thing when the dragon's eyes closed. The healing had not been one way. Yes, she had helped Kale live. But Kale had given Eris something she didn't even know she needed. A sense of purpose, a connection to something bigger than herself, and the knowledge that the past's wisdom could change the future if it was understood and respected. The story spread across the galaxy in just a few weeks. Not through official channels, though those did come too. Formal reports and scientific papers were published in the most prestigious journals of 100 different species. The story spread like all the best stories do, from person to person and world to world, on the wings of hope and wonder. Using knowledge from ancient Earth, a human scientist saved a dying dragon. The story tapped into something deep in the minds of everyone in the galaxy. In a time of advanced technology, molecular engineering, and genetic perfection, something old and simple had turned out to be the most powerful. And it had come from humans, a species that many people in the larger galactic community saw as young, talented but inexperienced, full of potential but lacking the deep knowledge of civilizations that had been around for hundreds of thousands of years. The first effect was that scientists were interested. Scientists from all over the galaxy started contacting Eris to ask for the full protocols, to study her methods, and to find out how she had combined her knowledge of plants with genetic engineering. Thousands of scientists applied to the Intergalactic Botanical Collective to study old botanical knowledge that had been lost. The archives that had been closed for hundreds of years were opened again. Universities started to set up new departments just for studying plants from the past. But the real change was deeper. There was a medical emergency on a planet called Meridian that was similar to Xylos's. A group of beings called the Luminous Ones, who were made of pure energy and lived in crystalline bodies, were having problems with their core essence. The usual way of doing things in medicine had not worked. Then Dr. Solace, a Meridian healer, remembered Kale's story and sent an urgent message to Eris asking for help. Could the plants on Earth help the Luminous Ones? It was a different body, a different world, and a different problem. But Eris treated it the same way she had treated Kale's illness, with respect for what the Meridian scientists already knew, a willingness to combine old wisdom with new technology, and the belief that healing often meant helping a system reconnect with its own natural ability to fix itself. The protocol that came out was different. It was changed, adapted, and made to fit the Luminous One's unique way of life. But at its core, it was based on the same idea, that Earth's ancient plant knowledge could be understood and translated to speak to any species, any physiology, or any biological system. And it worked. The Luminous Ones got better. Their essence has been restored. And once again the healing seemed to spread outward. The crystalline forests of Meridian, which had been getting cloudy and opaque, suddenly became clear and bright again. The news spread even more. On the icy planet Frostholm, a group of silicon-based life forms was about to go extinct because a crystal degradation that no chemical treatment could stop was happening. Eris changed her protocols again now that she was working with a group of researchers from 12 different species. People thought it was impossible to translate, change, and make botanical knowledge speak to silicon-based biology in ways that no one had thought of. And it worked again. At the end of the year, Eris had worked on healing projects for 7 different species that were in danger of going extinct. Each protocol was different and tailored to the specific needs of the species in question. But they all had the same idea at their core. The ancient wisdom of Earth, when treated with respect and used correctly, held answers that went beyond biology and somehow spoke to the very nature of life itself. The way scientists thought started to change. Researchers from 100 different worlds started writing papers about the philosophical and practical effects of what had come to be known as the Xylos breakthrough. There was a lot of talk about why ancient human knowledge worked so well. Some people thought it was because life on Earth had to deal with a lot of stress and change, which made plant chemistry very advanced and strong. Some people said that the knowledge gained from thousands of years of human observation and experimentation had found healing principles that modern science had somehow lost track of in its quest for technological progress. But Eris, who was speaking at a galactic science conference for the first time, gave a different answer. "I think," she said to researchers and healers from all over the known galaxy, "that ancient human knowledge was never really about the plants themselves. The plants taught us. The ancient healers knew something more basic through observation and experience. That every living thing, whether it's a person, a dragon, a luminous one, or anything else, has the ability to heal itself. It's not always outside forces that we need to attack with advanced weapons that get in the way of healing. Listening can be a part of healing. To heal, you have to remember. Helping a system reconnect with its own wisdom is what healing means. She stopped and looked out at the crowd that had gathered. My grandmother kept Earth's plant knowledge alive not because she thought we might need it someday. She kept it alive because she thought that real wisdom never goes out of style. It just waits, sometimes for hundreds of years, until someone finally gets what the old teachers were trying to say. I was lucky to be that person. But we could all be. We can all be. The question is if we are willing to listen to the wisdom of the past, respect it, and find ways to make it relevant to the problems we face today. When she was done, the hall was quiet. Then, little by little, the clapping started. At first, it was just a few researchers, but then it spread like light through darkness through the auditorium. At the end, everyone was standing up to honor not only Eris, but also the wisdom of all of humanity's ancestors and the idea that true healing comes from understanding, not from winning. 6 months after Kale got better, the Intergalactic Botanical Collective and the Coalition of Allied Worlds made an official offer to Eris. They wanted to build a new place for research. A place where people can learn about, protect, and use the ancient wisdom of Earth to solve problems all over the galaxy. They wanted Eris to be the first director of it. Eris read the proposal 3 times because she couldn't believe what she was seeing. A permanent building. A staff of hundreds of people from many different species. Access to the most advanced research tools in known space, as well as Earth's library of plant knowledge. The tools to do work that had seemed impossible before. She agreed. The Institute of Ancestral Wisdom, as it came to be known, was first located on Xylos itself. It seemed right. The breakthrough had happened on the planet. Kale herself seemed to like the choice. When Coordinator Vex told the dragon about it, Kale took the architects to a valley on the edge of the capital city where ancient gardens had once grown. It was like the dragon knew that this was the best place for the planet's healing. Eris was in charge of the design and building. The institute was not meant to be a sterile place for science. She instead made it a place to live, with gardens that brought together the plant knowledge of 100 different cultures from around the world throughout history. There were Chinese herb gardens, Ayurvedic healing plant collections, African root gardens, South American rainforest simulations, and Mediterranean herb patches. Not only did each section have the scientific name of the plant, but it also had the original names used by the healers who found them. One label said turmeric. In Sanskrit it is called haldi and in Malay it is called cuniyat. For more than 3,000 years, healers in the Indian subcontinent have used it. Found again as the basis for the dragon healing protocol. Something strange happened as the gardens were planted and started to grow. The plants themselves seemed to react to being on Xylos, near Kale, and the dragon's healing energy. Plants that had been having a hard time in the research facility's closed environmental chambers started to do well. Some of them got new traits that made them even stronger than their ancient versions. These traits were a mix of their Earth origins and the Xylosian environment. It was like the knowledge of Earth and the knowledge of Xylos were learning how to talk to each other. The Institute's first big project was to make a complete botanical codex, which is a book of knowledge that would bring together all the information we have about Earth's healing plants, along with modern genetic analysis and current uses. People from all over the galaxy helped. Xylosian scholars who had studied the plants on their own planet gave information about how human and Xylosian plant knowledge seemed to connect. Engineers made a knowledge system that could be sent all over the galaxy so that any species, in any language, on any world could access the information. Eris was always working because she felt a sense of purpose that she had never felt before. She and Dr. Kessa, who had become her closest collaborator and friend, worked together to come up with healing plans for Xylosian-specific diseases. She worked with Dr. Solace, a meridian healer, to improve the protocols that had saved the luminous ones. She worked with scientists from many other worlds, each with their own needs and point of view. But maybe the most important thing she worked on was something more personal. She started the process of getting back every journal, record, and piece of information her grandmother had left behind. She worked with the Earth archives to gather the old woman's research and carefully organize it, adding her own notes and modern analysis. It became the most important part of the Institute's library. It wasn't just a historical document, it was a living resource that was being used to save lives all over the galaxy. Coordinator Vex gave a formal speech on the day the library was dedicated. Eris stood next to him and watched as representatives from dozens of alien species walked through the doors of the building. This was a place where humanity's ancient wisdom was kept and honored. Vex said, "What we celebrate today is more than just a library and a research center. We honor the fact that wisdom doesn't depend on how old a civilization is or how advanced its technology is. We honor the humility to learn from the past and the bravery to use what we've learned to make the future better." We also honor the person who was smart enough to listen when others wouldn't. He turned to Eris, and the gesture was a formal greeting between two kings. You came to Xylos as a guest and a researcher, Dr. Thorne. You are leaving as the founder of something that will change how the galaxy thinks about healing, medicine, and the value of wisdom from all times and cultures. You will always be remembered by the Xylosian people. Kale will never forget you. And the galaxy will never forget the time when one woman chose to remember what her ancestors had learned instead of what her contemporaries had forgotten. That night, Eris went to see Kale one last time before she left. She was going to leave Xylos to travel around the galaxy, set up new branches of the Institute on other worlds, and help build the network that would spread Earth's ancient knowledge to every corner of known space. The dragon was in the Grand Sanctuary's restored gardens. She looked completely better now, like herself again, beautiful, strong, and full of joy that was impossible to miss. Eris knelt down in front of the dragon, which was a more formal and respectful way to show respect than a bow. I'm leaving tomorrow, she said. I wanted to say goodbye. Kale's huge head dropped, and her golden eyes met Eris's brown ones. The dragon's mind touched the human's mind again, this time gently. Kale's presence said, You're not saying goodbye. You're starting. You have my thanks, Xylos's thanks, and the thanks of everyone whose life you will touch. Get better. Teach and go. Go and tell the galaxy that wisdom isn't gone, it's just waiting. Yes, I will, Eris said. Thank you, Kale. For everything. For having faith in me. To remind me of what my grandma tried to teach me. The dragon's thoughts came to you. Your grandmother walks with you now. Her wisdom blooms in every plant you study, every protocol you make, and every life you save. That is how the best healers live on forever. Not by living forever in their own bodies, but by having their knowledge live on in the hearts and minds of future generations. Over the course of a year, Eris visited 17 different worlds, setting up branches of the Institute of Ancestral Wisdom and working with local scientists to adapt Earth's plant knowledge to each world's unique ecology and species. The institute was built inside a huge geode on the crystalline world of Meridian. The walls of the geode were naturally reflective, which made it possible for the luminous ones to study with human researchers. It took a lot of work to make the botanical gardens here able to survive in an environment of pure energy, but the challenge led to new ideas. Researchers found that some plants developed properties that could treat a disease called resonant decay when they were exposed to Meridian's unique radiation patterns. This disease had been bothering the luminous ones for hundreds of years. On Frostholm, the ice world, Eris worked with silicon-based life forms called the crystalline to come up with a whole new way to use plants. Researchers had to be creative because the crystalline couldn't eat plants in the usual way. They figured out how to get the good chemicals out of plants and mix them into mineral suspensions that the crystalline could take in. It completely changed how people thought about botanical medicine and opened up new possibilities that no one had thought of before. On a water world called Tidehome, where the people were aquatic creatures with nervous systems spread out over their bodies, Eris found that the botanical compounds worked best when they were delivered through the water itself. This made what she called botanical seas, which were carefully balanced water systems filled with the healing properties of earth plants. The first of these seas, made with the help of the Tidehome Council, was able to stop a neurological disease that had been slowly spreading through the population for decades. Eris learned something new about the range of Earth's plant knowledge with each project. If you looked closely enough, the plants themselves seemed to have lessons to teach. The ability of ginseng root to adapt to different conditions taught us something about how medicine can be flexible. The strength of turmeric's anti-inflammatory properties pointed to ideas that could be used to treat other kinds of biological inflammation. Ginger's gentle strength taught us how to solve difficult problems without making things worse. But most importantly, Eris was learning something about herself. She was beginning to realize that she was more than just a scientist. She made connections between people. She was able to understand both the old wisdom and the new technology. More importantly, she could help other people see that the two didn't have to be at odds. They could talk to each other. One night, a reporter from the Galactic News Network talked to Eris at a reception at the Institute's branch on a world called Harmony. Dr. Thorne, the reporter said, you've now set up branches of the Institute on 17 worlds and worked with more than 200 different species. What do you think has surprised you the most? Eris took a moment to think. She finally said, the fact that it is universal. I started this project with the idea that Earth's botanical wisdom might be a niche resource, useful for Xylos but probably too closely linked to Earth biology to be useful in other areas. I've learned that the basic ideas behind ancient plant knowledge are much more universal than most people thought. They are ideas about balance, restoration, and helping systems remember how to heal themselves. Those ideas work for every species I've met because they're not really about the biology of each one, they're about something deeper. They're about the very essence of life itself. And what do you think that means for the future? I think it means, Eris said slowly, that we've been thinking about progress the wrong way. We've been seeing progress as moving forward, leaving the past behind and welcoming the new. But I'm learning that real progress often means realizing that the old wasn't useless, it was just waiting. It was waiting for us to grow up and learn enough to understand why it was important. The future isn't about letting go of the past. It's about putting it all together. The interview was sent out to all the galactic networks, and it seemed to touch something deep inside beings on dozens of worlds. It seemed like people really wanted this kind of integration. More and more young scientists started applying to work at the Institute. People were finding and studying more old knowledge about humans. Colleges and universities started to teach classes on the history of plants on Earth. Gardens like the ones Eris had made were being built on planets all over known space. The movement that Eris had started was getting bigger than she had thought it would. Dr. Kessa sent Eris an urgent message 2 years after Kale's healing. The Xylosian healer's voice, which traveled across light years through the quantum communication network, had a worried tone that made Eris's chest tighten. "There is something happening," Kessa said. "Something we don't completely get. The dragon is changing. Not getting better or worse. But things are changing in ways that are very different from what we thought would happen. You have to come home." Home. At that moment, Eris knew that she had begun to think of Xylos as home. The place where it all started, where the dragon trusted her, and where the ancient wisdom first showed that it had power. She changed her plans and got a ticket on the fastest ship she could find. She looked over all of Kale's medical records, which were sent to the Institute on a regular basis, during the 2-week trip back to Xylos. Kessa was right. Something was going on. The dragon's vital signs weren't getting worse, but they were changing, going into ranges that hadn't been seen before in their records. Kale was waiting for Eris when she got to the Grand Sanctuary. The dragon looked healthy, strong, and more alive than Eris had ever seen her. But she was different in some way. The golden shine in her eyes had grown stronger. It looked like her scales were giving off a faint, beautiful glow. There was an energy, almost, around her that was different from before in a way that was hard to put into words. "Hello, Dr. Thorne," said a voice. Eris turned around. But there was no one there. Kale and Kessa were the only ones in the sanctuary. Then she understood. The voice was speaking directly to her mind. "Hey, Kale?" Eris said it out loud. Can you talk to people directly now?" Yes, the dragon's voice came for the first time. It was clear, bright, and nothing like the vague impressions Eris had gotten before. "This is what is different about me now. The healing plan you made did more than just fix my body. It is bringing something deeper to life. My ties to nature, the planets, and the very essence of Xylos are getting stronger. And as it grows, I am able to talk to more and more smart beings." Kessa looked both amazed and worried. The healer said, "We don't fully understand what is going on. But it looks like your plant-based protocol turned on something in the dragon's genes. Something from long ago. Something that may have been sleeping for thousands of years. Is it risky?" Eris asked, even though she didn't feel like Kale was a threat. Kale said, "It's change," and Eris could hear a hint of amusement in the voice. "Change is not safe or dangerous. It changes everything. I am turning into the person I was meant to be. Because of that, Xylos is also changing." It was real. She could see it clearly now that Eris was back on Earth. The change had sped up. The gardens that had been slowly getting better were now in full bloom, looking better than they had in hundreds of years. The forests were getting bigger, green, and full of life, pushing back into areas that had been gray and dead. It was as if the whole world was changing because of Kale's change. "What is going to happen to you?" Eris asked the dragon straight out. Kale said, "I don't know. But I think I'm changing into something else. Not only a protector of my world but also a link between worlds. Your knowledge of plants and my own ancient nature are coming together to make something new. And I think it was meant to be." Eris stayed on Xylos for the next few weeks to learn more about what was happening to Kale. The change in the dragon was clear even though it was slow. She got better at talking to people. By the end of the month, she could have complicated conversations with a lot of people at once. Her thoughts were as clear as spoken words to anyone who could understand them. But even more surprising was that Kale's connection to Xylos was getting stronger. The dragon could tell how healthy the planet was at any given time. She could feel energy moving through the ground, water, and air. No tool had ever been able to understand the needs of the ecosystem as well as she could. And most importantly, she could teach. Eris sat in the grand sanctuary with Kale and a group of advanced Xylosian healers and listened as the dragon talked about how different parts of Xylos's ecosystem are connected. Kale said that the healing you did with your plant knowledge wasn't just about the compounds you made. It was about reminding my body how to work with the living things around me. Your plants from ancient Earth knew how to live in harmony with nature. They had been improved over thousands of years by working with human healers who knew how to keep things in balance. When I took them in, when those ideas got into my body, something inside me woke up. Maybe memories or instincts that had been asleep. I suddenly remembered what it means to be a real guardian of a world. Can you teach us that? One of the Xylosian healers asked. Can you help us remember what we've forgotten? That's exactly what I plan to do, Kale said. The dragon and the people of Xylos were once true partners. We knew what each other meant. We worked together to keep our world healthy. The withering happened because that partnership fell apart. Dr. Thorne's wisdom from Earth can help fix that partnership now. And this time it will be even stronger. The things Kale said had effects that spread out. The dragon could change the whole foundation of the Xylosian civilization if it could teach them how to reconnect with their world and live in true partnership with nature instead of just using it. They would stop being a species that is fighting to keep their planet from falling apart and become true guardians again. 3 years after Kale's first recovery, Eris stood in the grand sanctuary of Xylos, which had been rebuilt, and looked at what the world had become. The sanctuary was almost unrecognizable from when she first got there, when it was a dying space. The gardens were so full of life that it was hard to see from one end to the other because of all the growth. Kale's healing presence brought the ancient trees back to life. Their branches spread so thickly that they made a natural canopy. 100 different kinds of flowers, some from Earth and some from Xylos, made a beautiful mix of colors and smells. Kale was in the middle of it all, but he wasn't sleeping. The dragon's eyes were open, and she was fully aware of everything going on around her. She could see how every creature in the sanctuary moved, how every plant grew, and how energy flowed through the ground. But more importantly, she was a teacher. Students from all over the world who were Xylosian had begun to arrive at the Institute of Ancestral Wisdom to learn from both Eris and Kale. They learned about plants on ancient Earth and how Kale understood Xylos's unique ecology. They learned how to read the planet's energy, figure out what it needed, and live in harmony with the world around them. And as they learned, Xylos changed. The withering had been completely stopped all over the world. The gray lands had turned green. The dead oceans were alive again, full of species that people thought were extinct. The air had changed, becoming clearer and sweeter, as if the world was not just surviving but thriving. But the real change went beyond the physical world. There was a change in the way the Xylosians thought. They used to be a civilization that was obsessed with technology and progress, and they thought that progress meant moving away from their ancient past and toward the future. With Kale as their guide and Eris as a link to Earth's wisdom, they learned something new, that to move forward they often had to honor the path that had come before. The Institute of Ancestral Wisdom began as a single research center on Xylos, but it has since grown into a network that spans 43 worlds. New branches are always being set up on new planets. The movement had grown a lot more than Eris had planned. Other worlds, seeing what had happened on Xylos, were asking their own versions of the same question. What ancient wisdom have we forgotten that might help us heal? On dozens of worlds, scholars were finding and studying the knowledge of their ancestors. The crystalline of Frostholm had rediscovered the mathematical principles that their ancestors had found thousands of years ago. They found that when these principles were combined with botanical medicine, they could heal their mineral-based bodies in ways that had never been possible before. The luminous ones of Meridian had learned meditation and energy balancing techniques from their own ancient traditions. When these were studied with Earth's plant-based knowledge, they revealed new things about the nature of consciousness itself. The knowledge that people had seemingly forgotten was the key that unlocked the rediscovery of wisdom all over the galaxy. But the most important effect may have been philosophical. People were starting to understand that progress didn't mean forgetting. That progress didn't mean forgetting about the past. That a species could respect what had come before while also moving forward with confidence. This was a revolutionary idea in a galaxy where the rule was that newer was always better and technology was always better than tradition. It was the result of Eris's desire to learn from her grandmother's old wisdom and Kale's realization that true power came not from conquering but from healing. Eris was asked to speak at the Galactic Assembly one night. This is the group that runs the coalition of allied worlds. She didn't want to accept because she liked working in the labs and gardens better than dealing with the complicated politics of running a galaxy. But Kale had pushed her. The dragon had said, "Your voice matters. You have something important to tell them. Go." Eris was now in front of the assembly, which was made up of representatives from hundreds of different species. They were arranged in tiers above her in a large amphitheater. Her grandmother would have been amazed at this moment, a descendant of hers speaking to an audience that included beings of pure energy, silicon-based life forms, creatures of crystalline structure, and dozens of other forms of intelligence that would have seemed like fantasy in Earth's ancient past. "I came to Xylos 3 years ago," Eris said in a steady, clear voice. "I thought I was bringing something to an alien world. I thought I was offering advanced human science to a civilization that was in trouble. But what I learned instead is that I wasn't bringing anything new. I was bringing something very, very old. And I was bringing it to a moment when it was finally ready to be received." She stopped and looked at the group of representatives. "My grandmother spent her whole life collecting knowledge that most people thought was useless. She learned about ancient plants, traditional healing methods, and stories and observations from times when technology was simpler, but the understanding of basic principles was, in some ways, deeper. People thought she was wasting her time. They thought the future belonged to pure science, advanced technology, and moving beyond such primitive understanding. But she knew something important, that in our rush to get better, we often forget things that our ancestors learned through thousands of years of observation and experimentation. This wasn't because we got smarter, it was because we got more specialized. We could do more complicated things, but we sometimes forgot how to do the simple things well." Eris moved forward. "I wasn't making some big scientific breakthrough when I used my grandmother's knowledge to help Kale. I was just helping a system remember what it already knew about how to heal itself. And that simple act, being willing to learn from the past, changed the course of our entire civilization. I stand before you today to ask, what have we all forgotten? Every species here has an ancient past, traditions that have been superseded by technology, knowledge that has been filed away as obsolete. I'm asking you to consider that nothing is truly obsolete. That wisdom is waiting, patiently, for the moment when we finally become wise enough to understand it again. And I am asking you to send your brightest young researchers to our institute, to help recover and study that wisdom, to find the ways it can speak to your specific peoples and your specific challenges. I've learned something that I think will change how we do medicine, science, and even civilization itself. The future doesn't belong to those who forget the past. It belongs to those who are smart enough to learn from it." For a long time the assembly was quiet. Then, slowly, people started to get up. They stood up one by one to honor not only Eris but also everything she stood for. By the end, everyone in the assembly was standing, a sign of respect for the principle she had stated. That wisdom is timeless, that the past and future were not enemies but partners, and that the best progress came when a civilization was humble enough to remember. The legacy blooms, an epilogue. 10 years after the dragon's healing, Eris Thorne stood in the middle of the main campus of the Institute of Ancestral Wisdom on Xylos and looked around. The institute now took up hundreds of acres. Many research centers, libraries with the knowledge of many civilizations, teaching gardens with the plant knowledge of Earth and 50 other worlds, and meditation halls where beings of different species learned from Kale directly. There were more than 5,000 researchers at the institute, and they came from all over the galaxy. Young Xylosians sat next to meridian luminous ones and crystalline intelligences, all of whom were working to find, understand, and use ancient knowledge to solve problems in the present. The world of Xylos had turned into something that no one could have imagined. It wasn't just a planet that was getting better after the withering. It had turned into a living laboratory of combined knowledge, a place where old knowledge and new technology worked perfectly together. Species that had never met before came to the planet to learn, heal, and study. People all over the galaxy knew the Xylosians not as victims of a plague, but as people who were the first to figure out a new way to understand civilization. And Kale. The dragon had become something that couldn't be put into words. She was still one being, still the beautiful creature that had been dying when Eris first got there. But she had also become something more, a light of awareness that could reach out and touch the minds of people all over the world, teaching, healing, and leading. In a lot of ways she was the heart and soul of what Xylos had become. Eris had clearly gotten older over the 10 years, but not by a lot. She was now in her 40s and her hair was starting to show gray streaks, not because of stress but because time had passed. The lines on her face told the story of a life of hard work, overcoming obstacles, and being completely dedicated to something bigger than herself. She had never been married or had her own children, but she had mentored hundreds of young researchers who had begun to see her as more than just a boss, but also as a mother figure and a guide through the difficult work they had chosen. A picture of her grandmother hung in a place of honor on the wall of her office. It showed the old woman in a garden, surrounded by plants. Her face was lit up with happiness because she knew things that most people didn't value. Next to it was a carving that looked like the one in the Hall of Transformations. It showed Eris kneeling in front of the dragon, which was the start of the story. The words below the pictures had become the Institute's guiding principle. Wisdom is not lost, only waiting. Eris had a meeting with Kale on this morning. Once a week, the director of the Institute and the dragon would get together to talk about work, progress, and the future. This had become a regular thing. She went to the Grand Sanctuary, where the dragon spent most of her time now. She still went to other parts of the planet and other worlds when she was needed, though. Kale's eyes opened as Eris got closer, and the familiar warmth of the dragon's mind touched hers. Kale said, "Welcome, old friend," and the thought made him smile. "Are you here to help or to cause trouble?" "Both," Eris said out loud as he sat down on a stone bench next to the dragon's huge head. "Don't we always?" "Yes, indeed. That's just how meaningful work is." "Tell me." Eris smiled. "This morning I got a message saying that a new world has applied for an Institute branch. It's a species we haven't worked with before, beings that are partly in our dimension and partly in others. In theory they should be able to use both earth plants and metaphysical healing methods. But we need to figure out how to do that." "And do you know how?" Kale asked. "Not yet," Eris said. "But I have some ideas. I want to look into the records of ancient human shamanism, which involved working with plant medicines and consciousness. I think there might be ideas there that could apply to beings who can access more than one dimension." Kale said with what sounded like complete confidence, "Of course there will be. No matter what kind of consciousness needs it, wisdom is still wisdom. The principles of healing are identical for entities in our reality and those in alternate realities. You can see this now." They sat in silence for a while, enjoying each other's company and looking at the gardens around them. As the day turned into night, the bioluminescent plants started to glow. The effect was so beautiful that it looked like the whole sanctuary was slowly turning into a place made of starlight. "Something has been on my mind," Eris finally said. "About why this all worked. Why my grandmother's knowledge and your biology together made something that could heal not just you but whole worlds. I think I finally get it." Kale said, "Tell me." "It's because my grandmother wasn't really studying plants," Eris said slowly. "She was studying healing. Healing isn't limited to any one biology or world. It's a principle that everything in existence has the knowledge of how to be whole. When you combine that principle with the willingness to listen, respect what came before, and humble yourself enough to learn, you unlock power that has always been there, just waiting." Kale's eyes got brighter, and Eris could feel the dragon's warmth of approval. "Dr. Thorne, you are now wise. You finally figured out what your grandma knew all along, even though it took you 10 years. You can't learn wisdom from books or technology. You have to go through it, live it, and make it a part of who you are. You did that. You have now become a teacher by doing this." "A healer," Eris said softly. "A teacher who heals. A teacher who helps people get better. My friend, these are the same thing." Eris thought about her grandmother as the light faded and the gardens grew brighter. Years before the breakthrough on Xylos, the old woman had died. She had never seen what her preserved knowledge could do. But in a way she was here, in every protocol that saved a life, in every garden that was being tended, and in every young researcher who was learning to respect the wisdom of the past. Eris realized that the most important legacy wasn't buildings or monuments, even though they were important too. The most important legacy was that people kept learning. The way that wisdom passed from one generation to the next, changing and growing but always staying true to its main idea. That all life has the knowledge of how to be whole. And she now knew that that principle was true for everyone. Last thought. Years later, long after Eris Thorne had died and Xylos had become known as the place where ancient knowledge and modern science came together to start a galactic renaissance, scholars would still study the moment when the dragon was healed. They would look at the genetic mechanisms, the botanical protocols, and the complicated relationship between the dragon's unique body and the plants that lived on Earth a long time ago. They would write papers and give talks to try to explain the technical parts of what had made the healing possible. But those who really understood the story, those who read it not just as a scientific achievement but also as a story of wisdom, compassion, and the power of listening, knew something more. They knew that the miracle wasn't in the exact compounds Eris had made, even though those were important. The miracle was realizing that everything the galaxy had ever needed to solve its biggest problems was already there, just waiting for someone brave enough to remember it. The dragon was saved not because a person brought advanced technology to an alien world, but because that person was humble enough to respect her grandmother's ancient knowledge, listen to a dying creature, and understand that sometimes the best medicine is just remembering what we already know. By saving the dragon, people had saved themselves. They reminded a galaxy that had been moving forward without looking back that the future, no matter how bright it might be, was built on the past. The old book said that wisdom grows like flowers do after it rains. And it had. And it would always be that way. The end.